Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday this week with Matthew Green. Hi, Matthew. Welcome back.
Hey, Vasco. Good morning.
Absolutely. And because today is Team Tuesday, we will dive into the patterns, the behaviors that teams develop that end up causing trouble. But of course, as our listeners know, before we go there, we always ask for a resource, a book. And we want a specific type of book, Matthew. We want a book that when you look back, you consider one of the biggest influencers on your career as a Scrum Master.
So you would think it would be sort of a framework or a techniques book. Really, for me, it was The Coaching Habit by, Michael Stanier. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I can read it, but I can't say it. But it really was a fantastic book in terms of teaching me and giving me ideas on how to ask questions into teams and get into more of a curiosity mindset rather than a telling mindset, which really opened the world up for me as a Scrum Master.
And this curiosity mindset, of course, serves us very well as coaches. And there are many reasons why we would want to take that kind of stance when we are working with teams. But as you remember the book, as you think about the key lessons that you got from the book, what do you remember as an example of the impact of taking that stance, that curiosity mindset?
What it opened up was it got me out of being the Scrum dictator. And it got me into the position of asking the team how they wanted to work and then being able to tie it back together, because then I could understand their point of view by getting their thoughts out. I was able to help them see how the frameworks or how we could adapt the frameworks to meet their needs, because Scrum isn't intended to be implemented rigidly. It's intended to be adapted to the organization and their context. And if you don't understand their context, it's very difficult to do that. And probably the least served people in all of Scrum, in my opinion, is the developer, because most of what happens for Scrum is done to the developer, not done for them in the modern day. So having the ability to ask good questions into the developers to understand where it hurt, what was really getting in their way, how we can make their lives better, and really understand the world through their eyes, opened up a way for us to adapt Scrum in a way that fit them better and actually improve their productivity, effectiveness, and happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the phrase you used. Scrum is something that is done to developers, not for developers. And of course, developer here has a wide sense. You could be UI designer, tester, of course, coder or programmer as well. But that's a very important aspect that the coaching stance brings, right? Because as coaches, we are there to help people. Just like you said yesterday, right? We are there to help people. And if we take the coaching stance, we open the possibility for people to want to and even ask to be helped.
Yeah.
So definitely the coaching habit. I'll put the link in the show notes so that people can easily find the book. It's a great recommendation. All right, Matthew, now we turn our attention to the teams that we hope to serve with our coaching stance, of course. And sometimes the teams, however, take a dynamic of their own and start developing these behaviors, these slight changes to how they work, how they relate to each other, these anti-patterns that might start as very simple things like an offhand comment in a meeting, but then can, if not tackled, develop over time and become really serious problems. So tell us one of those stories, Matthew. Tell us a little bit about the context and then dive through the story. Walk us through the steps of how that pattern or that set of patterns started to develop and ultimately negatively affected the team.
So I think one of the best examples that I had was a team that was working in a big data context. This is at a startup I was at many years ago. They had a weird understanding of the refinement activity. So they would take 40, 50 minutes and never really get a solid understanding. So we'd start a refinement, we'd bring a story up, we'd start talking about it. And then all of a sudden it would just be bickering and arguing back and forth across the table. It was almost like an old Miller Lite commercial, less filling tanks.
What was it that they were fighting to try to define what the story meant? Or was it that they were fighting because they were frustrated of not understanding the story?
they didn't agree with each other. They were fighting not only the meaning of the story, but they wanted to build it there. So part of it was a fundamental, but the anti-pattern was a fundamental misunderstanding about what refinement is about and what they're expecting out of it. But they would spend a huge amount of time and waste an incredible amount of energy trying to talk about implementation details.
So they were doing design, actually.
Yeah. And I'm okay with a little bit of design in refinement, because you have to have at least an idea of your approach to have a baseline for being able to do any estimation. But fighting down to the field level doesn't make any sense. And so the adding pattern was they weren't teaming. They were effectively a team that was still stuck in storming every day at the refinement table, because they couldn't find a way to work together as a team to decide what it was going to take them to do. And one of the adding patterns was still that individual ownership. Well, you're not going to be the person that does this story. I'm going to be the person that does this story. And so your opinion doesn't matter. Well, no, that's that's probably not true. So they dig themselves a hole, and they just never could get work to ready.
So they were kind of growing apart, right? Like as a
Yeah.
team, or rather as individuals, they were slowly growing apart. And the refinement was kind of maybe the lighthouse of that anti-pattern. It was the thing that was showing how they were growing apart.
It was the part that you could see, absolutely, because when they go back to their desks and they actually start working on it, the same behavior followed them. You just can't see it as well because they're not sitting around a table talking to each other. They're all sitting at their desks in front of the screens with their headphones on.
Thank you for sharing this story. I just realized something as you were telling this story, is that very often teams start to break apart. Any relationship can go through that kind of anti-pattern. And as they start to break apart, we need to, as Scrum Masters, to pay attention to the ceremonies and the interactions and see if we see those signs. And you just described one, right? Like the refinement battles that were going on. It was not really about the refinement. It was about the refinement plus everything else, like the relationship that they were not building. So when you look back at this story, what do you wish you would have done differently, or perhaps already did in this story, to help the team start to come together again as a team?
So with this team, I can't say that I was successful, because it was the way that team wanted to work. And you can only lead people where they want to go. But as we talked about on Monday, starting to reinforce the why and using why as that source of alignment was one of the techniques that I used with them. I learned and I've grown over my career to understand refinement is different. I think a lot of teams, and I spend a lot of time with teams in refinement now, explaining what we're really trying to get to, because I think a lot of teams see that the outcome of refinement is a pointed story. And I think that is an anti-pattern.
So what is it in your mind?
In my mind, it is the consensus of the team that if we plan this story, we can finish it. That is the outcome of refinement, is that we have work that is ready, and ready, regardless of what your definition of ready would be, means that if we start this story, we can finish it. We've gotten rid of any external dependencies. We've managed out all of the things that would stop us from successfully completing the story in the sprint. And we wouldn't plan it in the sprint if it wasn't ready. So to me, that's the purpose of refinement, is to make work ready. Now, once it's ready, now I have a baseline for estimation, and estimation just becomes a byproduct of refinement instead of its objective.
I really like the way you phrase this, getting rid of dependencies, making sure that we can deliver on the story, because actually that immediately brings another set of patterns, which is when in refinement we find a story for which there is a critical external dependency, great teams will make sure that the dependency is covered before they commit to finishing the story, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to finish it anyway. And therefore, they also create the dynamic to go out of the team and start collaborating with the wider organization. And I think that's a great illustration of how a great refinement session can help the team grow and can help the team improve collaboration internally and also externally.
Absolutely.
That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Matthew.
You're welcome.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.